Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Today we're going to be leaders of Viking clans. We're going to be going around the village and gathering wood and food and different Vikings like swordsmen and spearsmen and axemen. We're going to be going on journeys across the ocean and taking on some monsters, trying to get glory in the end. Today we're going to be looking at Champions of Midgard. This is a 2 to 4 player worker placement game from Greyfox Games. It takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. Today we're going to be doing a rule school. So I'm going to teach you how to set up and play the game rule for rule without having to look at the rule book. Well, without further ado, let's get started. Champions of Midgard is a 2 to 4 player worker placement game where you'll be one of many Viking leaders trying to get the most glory. You'll be going to different spots in the village trying to gather different resources and Vikings to help your cause. These different Vikings are like swordsmen, spearsmen, and axemen. You'll be using those to fight different monsters, using favor to help make them stronger, and using food, wood, and coins to help your cause as well. Defeating draugrs and trolls is the main way to get glory, which is points in the game, but be careful because if nobody defeats the troll, everyone takes blame, which is negative points, and some monsters and enemies restrict which Vikings you can send there. But the most glory comes from going on journeys with your ships and Vikings and trying to defeat powerful monsters, but be careful because different journeys will cause bad things to happen, like losing food, which essentially will mean losing Vikings to when you fight the monsters. And in the end, you're getting points by hidden objectives, by doing set collection, and a myriad of other ways. To set up, first find the round marker. It looks just like this, and you'll place it on round number 1. In the top right-hand side of the board, this is the round track, which will help you keep track of which round you're in throughout the game. Next, you'll find the market stall tiles. There's 2 different types, military and economic. You'll shuffle each of these in its own deck, and then you'll take a certain amount of them, as shown here in the bottom right, and you'll place them in the market stalls. These market stalls are on the right side of the board, about halfway down. And as you can see, if we were playing a 2-player game, you'd place 1 military and 1 economic. Notice that this is for 3 and 4 players. For a 3-player game, you'd add a second economic market tile. And for a 4-player game, you'd have 2 military and 2 economic. Regardless of how many players you're playing with, any tiles not used are going to be placed back in the box as you won't need them for the rest of the game. Now I put these face down so you could clearly see which ones were which, but when you're actually placing them out, you place them all face up. So it would look more like this. Next, you'll locate all of the ship tiles. 2 of them say public longship on them. You're going to take those 2, and you're going to place them right on the left side of the board where it says public longship. One of them is a small boat that can hold 5, and one of them is a large boat that can hold 10. On the left side of the board, just near those public longships, you're going to place the other private ships. Now, depending on the amount of players, you'll place a certain amount. You'll see the top 2 here say for 3 or 4 players, so you'd only use those with 3 or 4 players. On the top left of the board, you'll see a spot for trolls and draugrs. You'll find the decks of cards for those, shuffle them up, and place them in their corresponding spots. On the right side of the board, you'll see the merchant ships. You'll find the card for those, shuffle them up, and place them there. On the left side of the board, you'll see the Runesmith and the Sage's House. You're going to find the decks of cards of those types, shuffle them, and place them on their corresponding spots. Just like that. On the bottom left-hand side of the board, you'll see a spot for a monster deck and a spot for journey cards. You'll shuffle each of those decks up separately and place them in their corresponding spot. Next, you'll be taking many of the components out and placing them to the side of the board in piles so you can easily get at them through the game. We have coins, blame tokens, favor tokens, wood, food, and dice from the 3 of the different Vikings that you'll be using during the game. Now, these are just a small quantity of each of these. You'll actually have many more components of these types on the side of the board, but this is just to show you what they look like. The player who most recently earned glory in a battle would take this starting player marker. Otherwise, select the starting player randomly. Starting with the player sitting to the right of the starting player, meaning the last player in a clockwise turn order, they're going to select a Viking leader board. Then going counterclockwise, everyone else will select one, meaning that the player with the start player marker will be the last one to select. Next to their Viking leaderboard, each player is going to get some items. They're going to get a favor token, 1 white swordsman die, 1 coin, 1 wood, 1 food. They're going to take one of the discs of their player color and place it right here. They're also going to get a certain amount of workers depending on how many players are in the game. Give yourself 3 workers unless you're playing a 2-player game where you'd get 4 workers. With the worker or workers that were not placed next to your Viking leaderboard, you'll place 1 in a general supply. In this place, it's a 4-player game. If you're in a 3 or 4-player game, you'll have an additional worker of each color. Return those back to the box. If you're playing with a 2-player game, there'll be no workers left. Everyone will take their second disc of their color, put it at the top left-hand corner of the board at the 0 marker. Those are going to be used to keep points. Finally, every player will get 1 face-down destiny card. You can look at them, but keep it secret from others. We'll go over what these do later. The object of the game is to have the most glory, and you'll get that mostly by defeating different monsters. Defeating draugrs and trolls. Getting a private longship. And fulfilling secret destinies. The game is played over 8 different rounds. Each round, you'll go through a board setup, then people will go through in clockwise order, placing 1 worker at a time and taking the action that's on there. They'll also be assigning different Vikings to different monsters, draugrs, and trolls that they'll be fighting that round. Then you'll go into combat, and then you'll go into cleanup. To set up a new round, you'll take the top card off the troll deck and place it face up in the troll space. You'll take 2 of the draugr cards and place them face up in the 2 draugr spots. You'll place 1 rune card face up in each of the 2 rune spots just under the Runesmith spot on the board. You'll place 1 face down journey card in each of the empty spots. You'll place 1 face up monster card in each of the empty spots, noticing that the 4th spot in each row is only used with 4 players. In this case, we're playing with 4 players, so we'll add those. You'll take the top card from the merchant ship on the right side of the board, and you'll place it face up right next to it, covering any cards that might have been there from a previous round. You'll also take 1 of the corresponding dice and place it on the Swordsmith, Hafter, and Blacksmith, and the dice placed there are the ones that are shown on the board. You'll also take 1 food and add it to the smokehouse. You'll always add it regardless of how many dice are already there. Also notice during this new round setup, the ones with the blue banners are the ones that we are doing things to on the board here. Next, we're going to go to the worker placement phase, where you're going to be assigning your workers to different spots. And you can see there's some that are blue, some that have brown banners, some that have red banners. Now there is a reference guide tile that you can use to look at. It tells you what the different components are. It also will tell us about those different spots, where the brown ones are instant effects. The red ones are going to be used during the combat phase, and the blue ones are instant effects, and you'll stack new items there at the beginning of each round, as I just showed you, and these essentially are the worker placement markers. And while I have this guide up, when you flip it over, it actually shows you the different types of cards and what they are, so you can quickly find them. During the worker placement phase, each player starting with the start player is going to place a single worker on a spot. For most of the places on the board, when you place there, there's just 1 icon there, which means only 1 worker can go there. Once someone has gone there, no one else can go there this round. However, there is 1 spot, the hunting grounds, where as many different workers can go there as they would like. And again, the brown ones are instant, the red ones are for combat, and the blue ones will refill and they're instant. So here at the hunting grounds, this would not happen now, but it would happen later. So each player would place 1 in a turn order until all their workers are done. After everyone's placed all their workers, we move to the assigned Vikings phase. Each player that has placed 1 of their workers at least 1 of the red bannered combat spaces, excluding the hunting grounds, will be able to assign Vikings. These include fighting the troll, fighting 1 or both of the draugrs, and going on a public longship to go fight a monster. And it might look something like this. Now notice that some of the enemies might have Viking dice that you cannot use. This one has a sword crossed out, which means you cannot use a white swordsman die. So this yellow player did not go here because they knew that they could not use the sword die there. Next, we'll move on to the combat phase. The first thing you'll do is the hunting grounds. If there's any players there and they have dice left over from after assigning them to the Vikings just before, they can roll those to try to get food. Let's say this player had 3 dice left over, they rolled them and they got a hit for the sword, a hit for the spear, and 2 hits for the axe. That is a total of 4 hits. For each hit, they're going to gain a food with a maximum of 6 that they can get in a turn. Next, anyone that's possibly here trying to fight the troll, that would happen first in combat. So let's talk a little bit about combat. Here you have dice, and you will roll these dice. At any time when rolling dice, you can spend one of these favor tokens to re-roll any or all dice you want, and you can spend as many of those as you have and re-roll once any and all of those dice for every one of those tokens you wish to spend right now. Now each enemy has a defense and an attack value. Let's say I was happy with my rolls. For each attack I have 2 axes here, you would place a damage marker on this enemy. So here we have the troll, we put 2 of them there. But they're attacking and yours happening simultaneously. So you could lethally damage this troll, for example, but still take damage yourself. In this case, this is the attack value. You're gonna get 2 damage by default at the end of your roll after you've tried to damage the troll. So here we would normally take 2 damage, we would take both dice and they would be gone. However, for each shield that you've rolled, you take 1 less damage. So instead of taking 2, we take 1. When you take a damage, you can select any die to remove it, put it back in the supply. So we would, let's say, remove that one, and then we would continue through this, rolling the dice, maybe re-rolling, and looking at this until either the troll has been defeated or there are no Viking dice left. But let's say we rolled, I got an axe, I would have defeated this troll, but again, they still would have attacked me. I did not have 2 defense, so I would have lost this axeman. Now the troll works interestingly. If nobody defeats the troll, everyone will end up taking 1 blame token. Later in the round, I'll go over that later. These blame tokens are essentially minus glory. However, if someone defeats the troll, the player who defeated it, if they have any blame, can get rid of 1 and place it back in the supply. Then they can choose any 1 player, and that player has to gain a blame from the supply. Also, the player that defeated it will get some rewards. In this case, they'll get a wood, and they'll get 6 glory. When defeating enemies, if there were any Viking dice on there at the end of defeating that enemy, it would go onto your player board where you normally hold any of your dice. In this case, this troll had defeated our last axeman, so we have no dice, but if there were any left over, they'd go on the board. Also, you would flip this over so that other players cannot see which enemies you've defeated throughout the game. After you've resolved the troll, you'd then resolve the Draugrs, first the one on the left, then on the one on the right. In this round, nobody's fighting this one, so this would be the only one to be resolved. Also note that Draugrs give different rewards to the troll. As we saw, the troll gives glory, blame mitigation, and wood, where Draugrs give glory and gold. Now we're going to talk about what all the different spots of the worker placements do later, but let's just assume we had our boat here, and this is partially a red banner, which means this is a combat, and you would have assigned Vikings to this during that assigned Viking phase that I showed you earlier, but when you're using a boat to go on a journey, you also at the same time would place food. Now this shows a capacity of 5, which means total between dice and food, I cannot have more than 5 on the ship, and I do have exactly 5, and you would have decided that during the assign Vikings phase. Then I have chosen one of these when I originally got the ship, which I'll go into more detail later, but here we are because we're in the combat phase. I would then flip this journey because that's where I am, and that says there's no wind, I have to lose a food, so this would go away. Then I need to be able to feed my Vikings after this card has been dealt with. This shows me, depending on where you're at, this shows 1 food for every 2. 1 food for every 2, and 1 for 1 and 1 for 1. So the further you go, the more food you need for each Viking because it takes longer. So here, this is the only ship here. So we would resolve this, and I would have to give 1 food for every 2. Well, I only have 1 food. This would get spent and go to the general supply. It would feed 2 of these, which means 1 of these I would need to decide to remove and put back in the supply. So now I only have 2 dice. Then we would resolve combat against this with the Vikings that are left, as I showed you before. By the way, when you're resolving any of these journeys, you start from left to right. Anyone that's empty, you just skip to the next one like that. And just to summarize combat, you're going there because that is one of the main ways to get glory, which are basically points in the game. After all the combats have been resolved, we go to cleanup. First, you'll get back all your workers from the board, pull them off the spots they're on, and put them near your little Viking leader board. You'd also put back any public longships to their corresponding spot. If you have any private longships that you use that turn, you would then put it back into your supply. This is the time where you check and see if the troll has been defeated. We did defeat it in our round, but let's just assume we hadn't. Everybody would then get the 1 blame token, which again is negative points at the end, and you would put this in the discard pile. I'll show you where that is in just a moment, and any Draugrs that weren't defeated would also go into the discard pile. Now the enemy discard pile is just to the right at the bottom of the board. It says enemy discard. You'd go ahead and put those there. And any revealed journey cards would go in their own discard pile, which is right here. Also, any of the monsters that were not defeated, in this case, let's say none of them were defeated, they'd all get 1 coin. So over the course of the game, multiple rounds, if a monster is not defeated, it will get more and more coins to make it more desirable to defeat that monster. Then move the marker up 1. If it was already at 8, you'd then go to final scoring, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But now you know how the game works in general, let's go through the different places you can place your workers and what they do. You can go to the Runesmith, where you can turn in a wood to the supply and get a rune card. You can take either the top one or one of the 2 face up ones here. When you take them, you put them face up in front of you, and during your turn you can activate these one-time special abilities on this card. So for example, this says double your current coins up to a maximum of 5. After you've done that, you'd flip it face down in front of you. They're also going to be worth glory, which we'll go over at the end of the game. If you go to the Sage House, you're first going to look at any one of the face-down journey cards. These are the ones that you went through on your public longship when you were trying to defeat the monsters. You'll get to look at one of those face-down to see what you might be encountering. You'll also get the top card from the Destiny deck. Now these Destiny cards essentially are secret goals for you to try to accomplish. For example, the Troll Slayer. If you have the most troll cards at the end of the game, if you fulfill this condition, you'll get the larger of these points. If you fulfill that condition but you tie at least one other player, then you get the smaller amount of the points. And if you go to the Stave Church, you can turn in a certain amount of gold for a certain amount of favor tokens, and again, those favor tokens allow you to re-roll as shown previously. If you go to Jarl's Longhouse, you'll get to take the start player token for next round. You'll be able to go first, and you'll get to take one of the Swordsmith die from the supply. This is a good time to mention that anytime you get dice, you place them in one of the 8 spots on your board. If it's full with 8 dice, you cannot take any more. However, let's assume you were getting more dice than you had open spots. You can take from those dice the ones you want up to 8 dice, and then you would return the rest of the supply. All of the other components in the game are to be known as unlimited. It's also a good time, now that we're looking at the board, to show that each of those did have a special ability, and they're all pretty self-explanatory, like gain 2 glory whenever you spend a favor token to re-roll. When a player goes to the worker hut, they can pay to get their additional worker that was off to the side of the board at the beginning of the game. The first player to do it, it's $5, and in its subsequent round, the second person to do it pays $4, and so on and so forth through that. They can use that worker that round and for every round for the rest of the game. These blue ones are pretty self-explanatory. You'll just take all the dice that are on that spot. Remember, these are ones that get refilled with one of these each time. These buildings over here were the ones that were randomly put out for the military and economic tiles. If you remember, they were quite self-explanatory now that you can see the iconography. Pay 2 gold to get a axeman die and a swordsman die. Here you would get 2 glory, basically 2 points right away. Here you can trade a wood in for 2 food, and here you get a wood and a food. The merchant ship changes every round, so you do whatever the top card says. In this case, you'd give a coin to get something. In this case, it's 2 axeman die. And of course, the smokehouse again gets refilled every round, and you take all the food from that spot. If you go to the Shipwright, you can pay a certain amount of gold and wood, depending on the ship, to have a private ship. This one costs 2 wood and 2 gold, for example. You can only have 1 private ship throughout the game, but they have larger capacities, and they give you glory as well. And you get to use them for the rest of the game, taking them back at the end of each round into your private supply. Now, if you find yourself not wanting to or able to take any spots on the board, you can beg. You place one of your workers on your board, and you essentially will get 1 food and 1 blame token. Now, most of the cards and the stalls that were not selected in this game are self-explanatory, but if you have any questions, you can look up the details on page 14 in the appendix of the rules. Now for final scoring, you'd start with the player who's in last place at this point, and you'd first look at your destiny cards and see if you've done these. For example, have the most red enemies. Let's say I had the most, I would get 6 glory. If I tied for the most, I would only get 3. The other player that tied with me would not get any points. You can only score your own destinies, but you can stop someone else from getting the higher points if you tie them on theirs. You'd do that for all of your destiny cards. Next, you'd look at the sets of enemies. There's 3 enemy colors: red, yellow, and blue. Trolls are not considered a set because they are not a color. So for each set of red, blue, yellow, you'd get 5 glory. In this case, I only have 1 full set, so I would get 5 glory there. We'd then look at the runes, whether they're used or not used. In this case, I would get 3 glory. We'd look at the private ships. This one is worth 8 glory. I would get that now. We then would look at the favor. Every favor that I have equals 2 glory. So here I would get 4 glory for 2 of those. Every 3 coins, I would get a glory. So I would get 1 glory for that. And then we would minus blame tokens. Using this table that you see here shows me that 2 blame tokens, I would lose 3 glory. You do that for all your points for each player. And the one who has the most is the winner. If it's tied, the one who defeated the most enemies, the total number of cards, including the trolls, wins. And if there's still a tie, then you rejoice in your shared victory. Well, I hope this helped you dive right into the game and get to the fun quicker. Now, below this video in the description, there are timestamps for different sections, so if you need to reference those quickly, you can just click there and jump right to them. If you have further questions on the rules, I've placed a link in the description of the video. This will be the best place to put it, because not only will I see it, but so will the publisher.